often don't spend a lot of time talking about money on here, and that's a mistake because I don't want you to think that this podcast comes out of thin air. It cost money. This camera cost money, my lights cost money, editing time, creating the guide, which is the framework I'm using for these community divinations and for the content that I talk about at these new and full moons. All of these things cost money. It's not free. And the only way that I'm able to even offer this podcast to you is because you subscribe to the Divination for Liberation Podia at the amount that works for you. If it's only $6 a month, that's cool. When you buy readings, when you gift readings to friends and family, when you shop in my online store, when you get the 2026 or whatever Sidereal Astrology guide, when you gift readings to friends, when you drop a little money in my Cash App or Venmo, that is how I'm living and keeping a roof over my head and parenting my child while also doing this really meaningful work that requires a lot from me. This podcast is completely self-produced. All of the editing, visuals, social media clips, all of the graphic design, all of the conceptual creation, everything you see happening through Divination for Liberation and the People's Oracle is a one-woman show. I don't have any employees. I don't even hire people for work for hire. If I do, maybe an editor to help me with the guide. This is a one-woman show, and it requires me to still be able to eat and to pay for all of the subscriptions, like the platform that publishes the podcast, like the platform that allows you to book a reading with me, like the platform that allows you to download the content that I've shared, like the content that, the platform that allows you to be on the Div4Lib Podia, where all of the Astro Meetup videos live, where all of this other content lives. All of these things cost money, and it is because of you and your contributions and your patronization of my work that it continues. If you've ever thought about booking a reading or you were curious about your sidereal birth chart, please do that. That's how this work continues. That's how I keep showing up on your screen, on your phone, and in your ears. And I want to keep doing that. I love this work. It takes a toll out of me because it is deeply spiritual work that requires a lot of solitude and silence, but I do it with so much gratitude that I've been able to live from this work. And I hope that you will support me in continuing to do that. Hi, it's Dana, and I'm here with your divination for the full moon in Sidereal Scorpio. The 2026 Sidereal Astrology Guide says, fully using the power of my will to protect. Break down. If you can't hold it, let it hold you. Let it carry you. When you've done all that you know to do. I want to start this episode off by saying Scorpio is probably one of my favorite signs to teach about and to talk about. I feel like Scorpio is one of the most misunderstood, described, and interpreted signs, probably second only to Aquarius. I feel like Aquarius is the one where like most people are like, they don't know what they're talking about and they just making stuff up, repeating what they heard other people say. But Scorpio, number two for most misunderstood sign, probably Leo is number three. So that's what I want to start off by saying because I am kind of excited to talk about this full moon in the midst of this Taurus marathon that I've been talking about for the past two episodes. And I know y'all see it. These people legitimately have a website up talking about aliens, but they're actually referring to people who do not have citizenship documentation. And I think that is such an appropriate thing for them to do at this full moon in Scorpio because the wound of sidereal Scorpio is alienation. It is to be rejected. It is to be disqualified from belonging. It is to be told and shown that you are not one of us. You do not belong here. We don't like you. We won't accept you. And yeah, that's about right for Scorpio. I got a little note here that I wrote right before I sat down because there were some very specific thoughts I want to share. And this is what it says: there is no revolution without Scorpio. Not necessarily because they are at the helm of organizing or strategizing, but because their survival is a beacon illuminating the path of our collective liberation. Scorpio is not the sign that you find outside protesting necessarily. It's not the sign that you see leading organizations and at the helm of strategy. Scorpio is the sign who, by surviving, by being in the physical body that they're in, that is interpreted in a specific way by the dominant culture, is lighting the path forward. There is no revolution without paying attention to the plight of the most marginalized people, seeing very clearly how they are being targeted by the state, and understanding that the path forward is to make sure that they're all right. This is why I'm constantly talking about trans people, because by being themselves, they are illuminating the path forward. They are showing us this is the cost you pay for authenticity. The rest of you all are acting. The rest of you are pretending. You're not being yourself, whether that's in your performance of gender, whether that's in your performance of race, your performance of class. You don't really treat the people you don't like you really don't like them. You don't behave like you're afraid to die around the people who are trying to kill you. You act like they're your friend and you want to vote for them to be president. That's another conversation for another day. So, fully using the power of my will to protect. Part of what Scorpio teaches us is the importance of protecting ourselves from emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulation isn't always explicit. Sometimes it is in the subtle pressure to conform to the emotional consensus that we feel when we're around other people. Protecting ourselves from emotional manipulation looks like being okay feeling left out and not needing to participate in what everyone is doing, not necessarily because you're being contrary, but you're tapped into what makes you feel good. You're tapped into your feelings. The coping strategy of Scorpio is isolation, and it's speaking to an inherent aspect of being in your body. Nobody can get inside of your body and feel exactly what you're feeling, how you're feeling it, and when you're feeling it. No one can take on the context of your lived experience that lives in your nervous system and that is shaping and determining how you experience the present moment. That isolation of being embodied is inherent, right? It's something that we all experience, but Scorpio is just a little bit more sensitized to it, right? Trans folks are a little bit more sensitized to it. Black women, children, right? Because the violence that these demographic of people are subject to is saying, hey, Black women who are dying during pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum, your pain isn't real. So, RFK decided he needed to take the word Black off of the maternal health crisis, the maternal mortality rate. Because Black women, your pain is not real. That's alienation. So we get isolated in our pain. I was talking to a client the other week, and this was someone who had a lot of Taurus, right? And Taurus is, they function by abandoning themselves. They will make you laugh before they cry and grieve about how they really feel. Taurus will try to charm and disarm you rather than scream and run because they're afraid that you're going to inflict violence on them. And it made me think about this story that my cousin told me one time. If you're Black, you will relate, and you know what I'm talking about. So, my cousin was telling me how one day she was taking the train to like work or school. This is on the south side of Chicago. And as she's walking towards the train to go up the stairs to the platform, she sees a whole bunch of Black people running. Now, you know the rule. If you see people running, you don't turn around to look. You don't stop to ask. You just run. Well, unbeknownst to her, the people were running because the man who sold the crack had arrived. So she thinking she run into the train, and instead she's in line for crack. My cousin is not on drugs, okay? But this was a really funny story to me, and it's also just something that's inherent to Black people because of our trauma, that we have such a cohesive sense of shared threat that if I see a Black person running, I'm not about to turn around and look. I'm not about to stop and ask, "What are you running for?" It's like that lady, there was some gunshots at the White House, and I think it was a white woman or an Asian woman is live on the news, and she's turning around confused. She can't discern what the noise is, but other news anchors who were filming from the White House, like the Black one, immediately ducked and ran off camera. Right? Like it's this sense of self protection that Scorpio speaks to. It's this sense that I don't have to look left and I don't have to look right to question and ask and see what's going on. I can trust my own fear, but also for Black people, we just tight like that. Like the whole Montgomery brawl where the Black dude was getting attacked by the white dude at the river and that young man jumped in the water. There's this sense of I don't need to question because I trust that you can discern the threat. I do think that capitalism and promises of success and wealth under the guise of so called Black capitalism has been the primary force that has disrupted Black people's capacity to collectively discern threats in a way that allows us to act collectively. In a lot of ways, these systems have emotionally manipulated us to say that you cannot trust other Black people to let you know where the threat is coming from. Often by putting Black people in positions of political power and allowing a few Black people to have access to capitalism and to become capitalist. And so we look at those Black people and we still think that we're sharing the same threat. This goes for any form of representation, right? A trans person in political office, a woman at the helm of a company, an immigrant, in a leadership position in an organization. We tend to look to those people and automatically assume that they are sharing our sense of threat. That because we have the same skin color and identity, that the threat that they feel is most important to respond to is the same with us. This is why folks like Jasmine Crockett are so dangerous because she gets on camera standing next to that white man in California, endorsing him for governor. And she's speaking in her Texas Southern Black vernacular. She's moving her body in the body language of a Black woman. And you look at that and you see it as a mirror. You look at that and you're like, yeah, I relate to that. I connect to her. And you assume because she's talking to you in a cadence that's familiar to you, that she also understands what is oppressing you. And she also shares that sense of threat and responsiveness to that, right? That's why that's so dangerous because you see sameness, which is Taurus, on the outside, and you assume sameness on the inside. Fully using the power of my will to protect is ultimately about saying, hey, what's really trying to kill you? What's really a threat to you? Can you close your eyes, close your ears, tap in, be present to, attune to what you're feeling on the inside? Can you discern the ways that the news media and politicians' primary function is to manipulate you out of trusting your own body, to tell you stories and narratives and myths, to make you feel like your capacity to discern who and what a threat is to you is untrustworthy? This is why there's no revolution without Scorpio. Whether it's people who have lived the Scorpio experience or the way that we're collectively having the Scorpio experience during Scorpio transits right now. I'm always talking about revolution living in the body because it is in our emotional response and experience of the reality that we're living in that revolution begins, right? It begins with anger, it begins with rage, it begins with fear. But those things cannot be trustworthy if they're being narrated to you from the outside. Fully using the power of my will to protect the integrity of my emotional self. You cannot be afraid to feel if you want to get free. You also can't be transphobic if you want to get free. You can't abuse and oppress and imprison children in schools if you want to get free. Because those are the very people and things that are illuminating our path forward. One of the most radical things that you can do is allow your child to have feelings and disconnect your sense of worth, your sense of power and authority from whatever your child might be feeling in any given moment. One of the most disturbing things that I've been witnessing during all of this Taurus is the collective pile on and the collective shaming that we choose to do to people. And I just will never see any value in that, particularly when we're doing it to people who do not have political power, particularly when we're doing it to people who do not have capitalistic power. I'm always amazed at the way that we can come to some collective consensus, not about the people who are in office, not about the actual source of our oppression. We can excuse and give grace for genocide. We can excuse and give grace for our tax dollars being used to fund an apartheid state, the murdering of children, the stealing of people's home, the destruction of the climate. We can excuse that. This is not me advocating for saying that we should accept the lack of integrity from certain people. But if we have the capacity to come to a consensus about those things, it just feels like we're making someone a target because we feel powerless in other areas. Scorpio is always going to ask you who and what is really the threat. Truly. And this question of fully using our the power of my will to protect, it's like, what is it that you perceive yourself to be protecting by shaming and bullying and humiliating other people? What is it that you're protecting? When we're talking about harm, who is doing the harm and who is the recipient of the harm? And how are your efforts actually protecting them? There's a certain way that you have to see yourself as a victim. And I think it's no coincidence that so many of the collective myths that have emerged, the pseudo spiritual, teachings that have emerged over the past couple of decades is this idea that you are not a victim. You can choose not to be a victim, right? That, you know, you you attracted this experience. Your vibration was low. And so this is why you're having this negative experience. You have a poverty mindset. That's why you're poor. That is very subtle emotional manipulation that programs you to believe that you are your own oppressor. You are your own enemy. You are the source of your own hardship. Somebody make it make sense to me, please. Emotional manipulation is so common that I would describe it as the defining feature of American imperialist culture. Our entire advertising industry and system, the concept of advertising is emotional manipulation to make you feel a sense of loss or need where there maybe really isn't one. Fully using the power of your will to protect yourself is don't believe the lies. One of the things that I often talk about with regard to water signs, which are Scorpio, Pisces, and Cancer, is that there are no words. The words are the cultural language we use to communicate in absence of actually feeling and experiencing. Fear isn't as much a feeling as it is a word for the experience that we use to communicate in absence of someone's capacity to get into our own body. And words are really powerful in that way, that we hear something enough times and it has an effect on our body. It has an effect on the way that we relate to our own sensations. Fully using the power of my will to protect my right to feel, to protect my right to say who and what is a threat, to protect myself from emotional manipulation. This Scorpio full moon is just like a little blip in the midst of so much Taurus. And I really want for you to watch yourself and observe what's going on around you. There are some positive things about Taurus. I know I be going hard on Taurus, but it's hard not to go hard on Taurus when I watch what happens when we're having Taurus transits. I just watch these pylons and bullying and shaming and humiliating people and drawing these hard lines. The previous new moon planting seeds of shared identities, I really ask you to question, what identities are you sharing? Who do you see yourself the same as? So at this full moon, I'm asking you to like say, wait, hold on 1 second. Because the sameness may be external, it may be principles, but when it gets down to your day to day capacity to eat, have clean water, have housing, right? What are the threats to that? I think that so much of the emotional manipulation is used to protect principles and ideas that are often deeply disconnected from our material conditions. Why can't we come to a collective consensus about our material conditions? We can have so many arguments about so many things. I don't think that that is a mistake. It's what I would call psychological and spiritual warfare that disconnects you from your own survival instinct. Something I often talk about when there is astrological activity in fixed signs, which are Leo, Scorpio, Taurus, and Aquarius, is decolonizing our survival instinct. Our survival instincts are possessed by capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. Those systems have taken root in our nervous system. They're like mommies or daddies or abusers that we feel inclined to protect because of the trauma bond. Our survival feels intrinsically and irrevocably tied to the survival of capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. And if that's not evidence of psychological warfare, I don't know what is. How could you ever defend capitalism unless you feel like you can't live without it? You didn't come up with that on your own. You didn't wake up one day and said, "You know what? I would like to spend my time defending people's right to destroy the climate, steal from workers, hoard all of the natural resources, and starve the global south." You did not come up with that on your own. You didn't. There's a little bit of an oasis here in this moment where we can really see things clearly without the influence of external pressures to conform, without the influence of feeling like I'd rather belong than feel the truth of my material conditions. We're all out here performing like we're not one paycheck away from destitution. We all out here performing as if the climate is not collapsing around us every single minute of every day. We're out here putting on all types of performances because it's more important to belong and to feel connected to what everyone else is doing than to actually feel the truth of our bodies and our material conditions. What are you fully using the power of your will to protect? Let's pull some cards. It's time for advice from the People's Oracle. Today we have a request from Elysium, who's writing from Kansas City, Missouri. Her question reads, "Hi, Dana. I'm a longtime follower and so appreciative of the work you do. I was wondering if you had any advice on how to tune into my own inner voice and intuition as someone who struggles with strong levels of shame." Thank you for sending in your request, Elysium, and thank you for being a longtime follower. I'm glad I finally get to have a little bit of a pseudo personal engagement with you after you followed me for so long. So, you've got one of those charts where I look at your question and then I look at your chart and I nod my head and I say, "Yep, I see exactly what it is that you're talking about here." I want to point out just a few things that I'm seeing in your chart just to kind of give a name to what you are identifying and sharing in your question. First up is that Venus is ruling your chart. Venus is the planet of belonging. It is the planet that sensitizes us to the things that make us different and allows us to mimic and mirror and mask other people. So I think you might experience this as a struggle to maintain authenticity to your inner voice when you are around people. Strong Venus is like an attunement of our nervous system to be hypersensitive to other people's faces, to their body language, to their vocal tone, all of these nonverbal cues. And it can feel like we lose ourselves in social interactions and in emotional environments. To balance or contradict all of this, you've got Mars in sidereal Scorpio. Scorpio is the emotional protector, and it uses isolation in order to maintain the integrity of its emotional responses and its emotional experiences. I think that this is honestly one of the placements combined with some other things in your birth chart that would look like depression to me, and really struggling to find a soft place to land emotionally, a place where people aren't shaming you or judging you or punishing you when you express your pain or when you are honest and authentic about how you feel. This Mars in Scorpio is a double edged sword because it's keeping you from completely losing yourself. But the way that you do that is by isolating. There's one more thing I want to point out, and then I want to talk a little bit about what's coming up for you that might help you learn to navigate these aspects of yourself a little bit differently. So the third thing is that you have an earth dominant chart. Earth is one of the four tools, and earth is about realism. It is about sobriety. It is about being able to discern and see things exactly as they are. It is about being desensitized to our own internal emotional world and being hyper vigilant and sensitive to the distress of other people. You have a chart that leads me to believe that you have a bit of a caretaker streak, and it probably started really young. You weren't necessarily allowed to indulge your emotions and get the kind of attention that allowed you to explore your emotions safely without judgment and without rejection and without shame. So it's no wonder to me that you've internalized an incredible amount of shame towards yourself. Shame, I think, is kind of the internalized judgments that we get from people around us through explicit and implicit messages. And a lot of times we develop this dynamic with ourselves where if I shame myself first, then I can avoid the rejection of someone else. If I abandon myself first, then I can avoid the abandonment of other people. I think that the most important lesson and opportunity that's available to you is these Cancer transits. Now, listen, y'all gonna hear me talk about these Cancer transits during the divination portion of the podcast. You're gonna hear me talking about it on my Instagram page. You're gonna hear me talking about it every time I give advice because it really is the thing that's dominating the astrology of the next several months. And so, Cancer is doing what I like to call reclaiming our capacity to cry for help. I can tell in your chart that when you have an emotion, you question whether you should feel that emotion before you even get to settle on what it is that you feel. Isolation really is a helpful tool for you to be able to tap into yourself emotionally. But what it is that you really need to learn how to do is to feel yourself while you are in the presence of other people. And there's two pieces of advice or tools I'm going to give you to help you to that end, and understand that the Cancer transit starting June 1st and really building up through the end of the year are going to help you with that. One is strengthening your inner voice. And what I mean by that is one of the tools and ways that I teach my clients, whether it's in coaching or in astrology readings, to do this is to have a script. A lot of times we lose track of where we are emotionally because we're so tuned into other people. And so sometimes it means narrating out loud what you're experiencing. It's saying when you're in a conversation that's making you uncomfortable, this conversation is making me uncomfortable. I don't necessarily want to stop, but I just want to pause and acknowledge what I'm feeling. It's being in the moment with your feelings in a way that you probably didn't get from your caregivers. You know how a baby can speak gibberish and nonsense, and mommy or grandmother or daddy, whoever, is doing their best to interpret the nonsense so that they can meet the need. They interpret it by talking back to them, but they interpret it also by learning the patterns of the baby and understanding what the nonsensical sounds mean and responding in the way that allows the baby to learn to discern some of the different feelings that they're having. So you've got to learn how to discern some of the feelings that you're having by reprogramming and revisiting that inner voice that you probably don't have, the inner voice that's programmed to ignore how you're feeling, the inner voice that's programmed to be suspicious about how you're feeling, and the inner voice that probably makes you look left and look right to see how other people were responding before you can even give yourself a chance to not only trust what you're feeling, but to act on it. So, programming or reprogramming that inner voice is really talking to yourself about your feelings while you are around other people. The second thing is this: often With a chart like yours, who's so intuitive, such a caretaker, so good at making emotional space for other people, it means that you can feel a sense of intimacy and closeness with people that's not real. It can make other people feel like you know them and see them very well. But what's actually happening is just you're using your pattern recognition skills, your sobriety, and your ability to be attuned to other people to make yourself feel safe. It's important that you don't confuse that with emotional safety, intimacy, or real closeness. This brings me to my second point, which is that you got to go slow. You got to give yourself a chance to go slow so that you can disrupt that pattern of being completely lost in the interactions and dynamics and the motions of people that you're around and then going and being by yourself to actually feel yourself. You want to integrate those two things, and it's going to require you to go slow. Thank you, Elysium, for your request again. And if you want to get advice from the People's Oracle, you can click the link in the description and fill out the form. I want to just give a little bit of a tip because I know some people have sent in their request. Please make sure that your request is a question about the topics that I've listed to help guide you. And please refrain from adding any questions about planets or placements. As an astrologer, the placement or planet that you might feel is relevant to a question may not necessarily be relevant at all to me. So I want everybody to feel like they have a chance to get their advice responded to. And if you follow that tip, I promise you that I'll get to you if I can. All right, I'm back with my tarot cards. Let's see what wisdom is available to us. We are fully using the power of our will to protect. And I feel like this is such a radical act in the midst of so much real pressure to conform. And I want to be clear that the pressure to conform isn't like you better be the same as us or else. It is if you don't conform, you won't eat. You will be homeless. I will lock you up in prison. I'm going to send you to some place you never even came from. I'm going to starve you to death. That's the stakes that we're really dealing with. A lot of times we are so disconnected from our bodies and our feelings that we stay in the realm of theory and principle and we don't really recognize the stakes because there's this like veneer of safety that makes us feel like, well, that will never be me, but it just might be. We've got the 5 of swords here. I don't know a more perfect card to be on the bottom here as our context. The 5 of swords is about disregarding the opinions and judgments of other people. It is really this sense of protection that is like, don't let yourself be influenced. And sometimes you need to not let yourself be influenced by literally plugging your ears. Silence and solitude are very important tools for people who have Scorpio placements and for us when we're collectively experiencing Scorpio transits. Silence and isolation is the way that we shield ourselves from the more subtle ways that we feel pressed to conform when we're around other people. Scorpio is the balance to Taurus. Taurus is tapped in and tuned in to other people. Taurus is the glue that maintains the cohesiveness of the group. Taurus is the connector. Taurus understands the value of community and belonging as a survival necessity. But too much Taurus, and we lose our capacity to answer to what our body needs and demands from us at any given moment. And so Scorpio is the answer to Taurus is encapsulated in this 5 of swords. Because the 5 of swords says at this time, it's actually good to not care what other people think. It's actually good to plug your ears and say, I'm not trying to hear it. And we do this not just in a reactionary way or contrarian way, but we do this because it affords us the opportunity to actually listen to our own bodies. We're always getting verbal and explicit and implicit and nonverbal signals from other people, whether it's on social media or whether we're engaging in person or whether it's through the media and the ways we're made to believe that this is what everybody thinks. This is what everybody feels. If we're performing and we're all reading a script, yes, everybody thinks that and everybody feels that. But when we come home to our bodies and tap into, there's a kind of presence to the 5 of swords. Let's keep going. Let's see what else we've got. We've got the 2 of wands and we've got the 8 of cups. The 2 of wands is a really interesting card to me. It is often not a card of action and more so a card of positionality. It's a card that's describing, where are you at in this? If there was a card to be associated with the element of power at this full moon, it would be the 2 of wands, because the 2 of wands is the card of dominion. I often see the 2 of wands as coming into awareness that you're actually not in the inferior position. You actually know more, see more, feel more, have more depth, more maturity, more power than you think you do in this situation. As a matter of fact, in relationship dynamics, the 2 of wands is often signaling that you actually are the more mature person, that you have the power in this situation. Y'all are not on the same level. There's a way I think that the 2 of wands is asking us to lean into the discomfort of feeling powerful. For Scorpio transits, that often looks like not being afraid to affect people emotionally, letting go of fears of emotionally overwhelming people, letting go of the shame that comes with maybe transferring some of your distress, pain, and fear onto other people. How else do you presume that you will be protected and be safe unless you actually show and express that you feel unsafe? I started talking earlier about how water has no words. In fact, words are often a distraction from actually being felt. Your capacity to communicate well how you're feeling often convinces people that you're not really in distress. You're not really in pain. There's nothing wrong with you. Because if you really were, insert emotion, you wouldn't be able to talk about it. You wouldn't be able to use your words so well. And maybe they have a point, because many of us develop the capacity to use our words to communicate well about our feelings because we are ignored if we don't. But there is something deeply human, deeply healing, and sometimes really overwhelming by genuinely being felt by other people. When you're genuinely being felt by other people, it's like you're that baby for whom everyone is trying to interpret your distress. Everyone is they're reading your face. They're tuning into you. They're paying attention to your patterns. They're disregarding whatever they got going on just for the moment to give you all of the attention. When you don't really have water in your chart, that can be really terrifying and something that you ignore at all cost. Sometimes if you have too much water, it's really terrifying and you ignore it at all cost. Because instead of that attentiveness and that attunement, you're getting reactivity. You're getting blamed. You're getting shamed. You're getting pacified to the point of disempowerment. So, Two of Wands is about reclaiming the power of your body, of your emotions. This full moon is trine very tightly Saturn in Pisces. And that trine is reinforcing the tool of water. It's saying your skepticism is warranted, but don't use that skepticism to try to convince other people that they're lying to you or that they're not discerning the truth correctly or that they're not connecting the dots correctly. Use that suspicion to empower you to actually protect yourself. The 8 of Cups is, I kind of feel like I just talked about it, right? 8 of Cups is leaving behind an established emotional posture. Sometimes it can literally be leaving and getting up out of here, right? But it can also be about having maintained a relationship to ourselves and other people emotionally that might feel like a sunk cost fallacy. It might feel like the value of the time that we've already put in is the reason why we should stay, is the reason why we should continue engaging in the way that we are. Where in your life are you being given the opportunity to reclaim your emotional power? Not to speak up, but to express up. Sometimes expressing how you feel is silence because silence creates a force field of curiosity. It creates these blanks that welcome the opportunity for other people to fill them in with their own capacity for recognizing patterns and tuning into you. Silence is really powerful because it makes other people rely on their capacity to feel you rather than you relying on your capacity to articulate and relying on their capacity to understand what you're saying. You don't want them to understand what you're saying, you want them to understand how you feel. Words can be useful in that way, but they can also be a complete distraction. I think there is a message in here for someone that also says, I know that people will judge you, they will shame you, they will reject you if you leave. They're going to have some words to say. It's going to be a problem. Some people might decide that they don't want to be in your life anymore. Leave anyway. Belonging at the expense of your emotional truth is not belonging. It looks like belonging, but on the inside is actual self abandonment. If protecting yourself from being abandoned by other people means that you routinely abandon yourself, you don't belong. You don't. And you're delaying the inevitable. This 5 of Swords is giving you permission to deprioritize other people's judgments of you, to not spend your time and energy trying to imagine how people are going to interpret and judge and think about what you do. There's a time and a place for caring. There are places and times where the investment is worth it. This ain't it. Are these systems we're divesting from? How are we divesting from systems? I think this is a conversation that a lot of people have online very often, and it often falls as a burden on an individual person. divest from capitalism. You got to live off grid. You got to stop shopping at this place and you got to stop shopping at that place. If that makes you feel better, I really think that you should do it. That's not real divestment. I think actual divestment is being yourself. Furthermore, actual divestment is never going to be an individual act. That's for your own conscience, and that's fine. I think that's okay sometimes, but it's not the same as the actual divestment that causes systems and institutions to collapse. I want to say something real unpopular, and then I'm going to close out. This whole Cheyenne Bryant discourse, I don't really know what's going on with that woman. And so I don't want to act like I do. But I am interested and curious in the conversations that have been occurring in light of gestures broadly at Cheyenne Bryant. And I'm interested because there needs to be room for a conversation about how the mental health industrial complex, how academic institutions are inherently violent to marginalized people. And they are often the last to catch up. There are still people being trained to be doctors that believe that Black people have thicker skin, and so we are less tolerant to pain. It is still killing Black people. Half, if not most or all, of the pathologies outlined in the DSM don't take into consideration racism. How can you have a description of anxiety and depression if you're not willing to describe what's causing it? How do you take the pathology out of the cultural context within which it emerges? If anything, the DSM is a diagnostic manual for the symptoms of imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. It's describing what happens to a people who have to survive systems that put their own labor in between their access to care, in between their access to a home, in between them and their access to food. The DSM is not pathologies of individuals. It is the pathology of America. It's the pathology of Western culture. It's the diverse symptoms and pathologies that emerge when people are oppressed from birth. So we have to be willing to have a conversation about the fact that there is a market. There is a need for people who are operating out of institutional spaces. This is by no means me advocating for, endorsing, or condoning anything that Cheyenne Bryant has done. I want to give a shout out to Yolo Akili on Instagram and Threads. He runs a organization called Beam out of LA. And I think that he is at the helm of taking the myriad of wellness modalities, including, clinical psychology and those who are licensed and social workers, but also other healers and those who work with other modalities, particularly with Black people. If anyone's having the conversation and doing the work, it's definitely them, right? Beam is creating workshops, trainings, conversations for community mental health workers, providing tools outside of the institutions and structures that are built upon, you know, uh, the omission of the truth about what's really the cause. Thank you for tuning in to the Divination for Liberation podcast. I am your host, Dana Lynn Knuckles, also known as the People's Oracle. I don't have a COVID update for you. We are still in this space of being as low in COVID transmission, according to wastewater calculations, as we've been since 2020. We're at an all time low. I will see you in a couple of weeks for, unfortunately, my dear friend, a second new moon in Sidereal Taurus. In the meantime, in between time, you take care of yourself. I do have one quick announcement. I went live on Zoom a few days ago and I talked about Jupiter in Cancer, what it means for us collectively. I did some horoscopes, and you can actually find the first part of that presentation as a bonus episode of the Divination for Liberation podcast. If you would like access to the horoscopes, I'll drop the link here. If you're a member of the Divination for Liberation Podia community, you have access to the video presentation that I did. And if you are a paying subscriber for as low as $6, you have access to the horoscopes. I'll see you on the next episode of the Divination for Liberation podcast. You take care of yourself. Bye.